It's likely this is the last video I'll make on the subject of Mayweather Pacquiao. I know this is about my fifth video in a row, but I'm a big boxing fan and it's a big story. Um, I'm probably going to cover a lot of the things I mentioned in the last video, but I noticed that was quite on the long side, so I'm going to try and aim for this one to be more concise. Um, Obviously the repercussions are coming now of the result of Saturday night's big fight. Um, Saturday night? Yeah, I think it was Saturday night. Anyway, the repercussions are coming, and for the most part, they seem to be negative. Um, the general consensus is that it was a boring fight and that it was overhyped. Now, about the fight itself, I did actually manage to watch it now because someone had sent me a link. I disagree; it was entirely boring. I think the first six rounds were actually quite watchable. And listening to it on the radio, there were a few moments I was on the edge of the seat. Now, I know it's not the same watching it and listening to it on the radio. The end of the fight, yeah, could have probably been more exciting. That's true. And is it worthy of being called the fight of the century? Based on the action of the fight, I would say no. Let's be honest about that. It's not. Um, I think what people want to see in something build so big is a real war between two sportsmen. What we had there was one guy trying to bring a real battle, the other guy doing a very good job of defending, um, and basically winning the fight. That's the first thing that we have to acknowledge. I'm a Manny Pacquiao fan, okay? I prefer his personality. I prefer his style. I prefer pretty much everything about him. I'm a huge Pacquiao fan, and I wanted him to win. And I was disappointed. I was disappointed that he did not get it because I honestly believe that had he done so, um, he would be put into legendary status. I mean, Manny Pacquiao's already a highly respected figure to millions of people, but I think he would really have been in the echelons of Muhammad Ali, and I don't think that's an exaggeration. I think had he beat Floyd Mayweather on the night, that's the implications. But let's not take away from Floyd Mayweather. Let's not disregard his achievement. A lot of people are focusing on how it was done, but the point is it was done. In boxing, the basic principle is hit and not get hit. Now, Floyd Mayweather is a master technician at that, and he's possibly the greatest defensive fighter ever, possibly. One thing I would say though about the whole unbeaten thing, and I mentioned this before, but 48 fights, whilst quite a lot, and if he gets one more, 49. Remember, there's been a lot of fighters that have actually won more fights in a winning streak. Two names that come to mind is Jimmy Wild, who lived about 100 years ago and unfortunately is hugely overlooked these days, but he was one of the greatest fighters who ever lived and generally accepted as the greatest British fighter ever by serious boxing academics. And Julio Cesar Chavez. Now, both men had a longer winning streak than Floyd Mayweather has had. Um, and actually, there's many guys who are not that well known who have also had more winning streaks. I think the difference, though, is the people that Mayweather beats. I mean, he beats fellow Hall of Famers. And in boxing, it's to remember, to casual fans, it's not just about how many wins you have, it's about who you beat. And no one can take away the fact that Mayweather has beat some truly big names in the sport. I mean, you look at guys like Arturo Gatti, Oscar de la Hoya, Jose Castillo. Well, by the way, I haven't seen those fights in detail, but because many people consider that Mayweather's sort of peak. Um, Now Manny Pacquiao, and there's many other names there I haven't even mentioned. Saul Alvarez, many others. I do believe they're all future Hall of Famers. So for Mayweather to beat them is a profound achievement. Chris John, incidentally, the Indonesian fighter, I think he had a winning streak. I think he only ever lost one fight, unless I'm mistaken. Um, Joe Calzaghe retired on 46 fights, but the interesting thing is when Calzaghe retired, he wasn't lauded to the same extent as Mayweather was at the same number of fights. And I've wondered why is that? Well, maybe it's because the two really big names that Calzaghe beat, which was Bernard Hopkins and Roy Jones Jr., Um, the general consensus is they were old men. It could well be that that is a fair point that they were past their peak, but Calzaghe wasn't exactly in his golden age either when he beat those guys. So I think, in my personal opinion, Joe Calzaghe is somewhat underrated, at least from an international perspective. But anyway, about this fight, here's some views from other boxers, which because I've noticed something with this one. There's a difference between the views of the fans, overwhelmingly Pacquiao fans. Strangely enough, Mayweather fans have been somewhat muted. They're obviously happy the man's won, but I haven't seen them sort of come out online in force, sort of onto Pacquiao videos or anything, say, "Oh, look, we done it," this sort of thing. So surprisingly enough, they haven't really been gloating about it from what I have seen. Anyway, here are some views. Paraphrase: He has to go down as one of the greats, referring to Mayweather. David Hay: The art of boxing is to hit without getting hit back. Money's 48-0 is proof that perfecting this strategy guarantees invincibility. Mike Tyson: I think he and Mayweather won the fight. He was a pop-shotting Manny. Manny had a good beginning, but he controlled it. Mayweather controlled it. It's his era, his time. He is in invincible mode now. No one can stand with him at this particular moment. And quite honestly, Tyson's probably right. Carl Froch: Was Pacquiao that poor or Mayweather that good? Mayweather was that good. He was sharp, accurate. I want to see more from Pacquiao. I'm disappointed. As a boxing fan, I feel pretty deflated. I feel a bit let down and dissatisfied. Johnny Nelson: He, Mayweather, ran away with the fight and I had him 4 rounds up. It was a complete masterclass. He adjusted quickly and used his boxing ability. Barry McGuigan: Mayweather was much too smart and too quick for Manny. Just as I predict, the fight was boringly one-sided. Frank Bruno: In this generation, you have to go very, very far before you can be a skilled craftsman, businessman, technician, professional, and a king in knowing his craft. As a boxer, you've got to admire Mayweather. He's got to go down as one of the greats. Amir Khan, and his opinion is important. I'll tell you why in a minute. Well done, Floyd Mayweather. Great performance. I took Manny's best shot, and he just had to come back. It was a classy fight. The mistake Manny made was dropping Mayweather's pace. To fight Mayweather, you have to stick to your own pace, and that's something a young fighter would do. Now, he's talking about himself there. I'll come to Amir Khan in a minute. Lennox Lewis: We waited 5 years for that. Some people want blood and get disappointed when they don't get it. Doesn't take away from the fact that Floyd is a great technician. Oscar de la Hoya: Sorry, boxing fans. Call me old-fashioned, but I like the fans getting their. Actually, call me old school, he said. But I like the fans getting their money's worth by watching an action-packed fight. I'm just not into the boxing running style. I like jumping out of my seat because the fight was exciting. Barry Hearn: He's Mayweather a cup of tea fighter. When he's on, you've got time to make a cup of tea. Evander Holyfield: I thought Pacquiao was doing well. Don't know how people scored the fight. I thought he was doing well. Here's some stats if you are familiar with them already. This is very important. Punch stats. Pacquiao is one. Uh, basically, if you look at the stats, it's very difficult to argue against the fact that Mayweather won. And the first thing Pacquiao fans have to do is just consider the facts. I think because what people are doing is they're focusing on how it was won rather than the fact it was just won. And I remember at the time a commentator said that these people don't realize they're in the presence of greatness. In other words, Mayweather's not loved in his time, but maybe in the history of boxing, he's going to be seen as an absolute. I was thinking about this last night, where he will rank in boxing history. It's difficult to see him anywhere less than in the top 15 boxers of all time. After this, I mean, in terms of his strategy, in terms of the sort of style that Mayweather has. And I was trying to explain this to non-boxing fans. Not that I'm a Mayweather fan, and not that I'm a fan of that style either. I'm with Oscar De La Hoya. I would prefer to have seen a war like this for like Manila. But ultimately, what a boxer has to do is hit and not get hit, and that's what Mayweather done. Um, People are talking about a rematch. Personally, I'd like to see it, but I just don't think it will happen because the promoters know full well that people feel let down, and it would be very difficult for them to promote that fight. Secondly, well, I can think of many reasons. Secondly, Mayweather has said he's one fight left in September, and it seems most likely that will be against Amir Khan. Apparently, Mayweather was asked about this, and he said in the single word, "Khan." That's the man he wants. Um, Generally, it's regarded that Amir Khan is not on the sort of level of Manny Pacquiao, but Khan shouldn't be underestimated. I think he's a pretty good fighter. And if his theory is right that as a much younger man, he can outpace Mayweather, might be interesting. I don't think Khan will win, and I hate to say that as a British fight fan. You know, of course, I'll be backing Khan, but realistically, I don't think any fighter now can do it. If Manny Pacquiao can't do it, there's no fighter in the world who could beat Floyd Mayweather. It would be great if he did, and I think if Khan beat Mayweather, he would absolutely be his his legacy would soar, at least in Britain, and hopefully around the world as well. He would get some respect. I think a lot of Filipino fans would want Khan to win simply because they can't stand Mayweather. Regarding the Filipino fans, and this is not to disrespect anyone, but it's just an observation. Um, I understand that there's a lot of disappointment, but you know, some of the memes that are going around, I don't have much time for either in this fight or any fight. For example, people are calling Mayweather a card. I understand that his style is frustrating. I understand this sort of running around technique is boring to fans, but that's not the same as being a card. I mean, when you really break it down, it is not cardy to go into an arena with whatever it is, 16, 17,000 people booing you, and it was an overwhelmingly pro-Manny crowd. I personally prefer fights where there's a balance in the crowd. Now, on one level, it's understandable why Mayweather is a controversial fighter. He doesn't exactly make himself endearing in terms of his arrogance and the way he flashes money. At the end of the fight, he did try to be sportsmanlike, and but it didn't go down too well. Now, this thing with Manny saying that he had an injured shoulder and that's why the Pacquiao camp might be pushing for a rematch. Pacquiao saying he didn't want to make a deal of it before the fight. I have to say, there's aspects of this that obviously more will need to be investigated as to what exactly happened with the shoulder injury. But this is uncharacteristic of Manny Pacquiao, and I have to say, I go with Carl Froch on this. Pacquiao needs to accept that he lost. I don't think because if the strategy here is to push for a rematch, Mayweather's not going to take it. He's got no incentive to take it. Even if the fans hate him, he's not going to take a rematch. And why would he? Because if he takes a rematch, he's not going to change his style. So unless Pacquiao can't learn something different about how to beat Floyd Mayweather, I can't see any strategy for either man to do this. Um, I think in his heart of hearts, I think Pacquiao even knows this because when he got back to the Philippines, the first thing he does was went to a church service. You know, he does not look like a man who genuinely believes he won. I think he's saying it to please the fans, and Carl Froch shouldn't appreciate that. And I don't know. I think you know, as a Pacquiao fan, I'm very disappointed, but it's difficult to say. Like looking at the stats here, and I wasn't familiar with that until I read that. It's difficult to argue against Mayweather winning that fight. He won the fight. Let's just accept the fact. And I think Pacquiao fans need to be a bit more mature about this and just accept it. On the other hand, I do understand why a lot of people, not just Pacquiao fans, but all fans, feel somewhat let down by the fight itself. The way it was billed was that it was going to be a real battle, and it wasn't that. Let's be honest. There was many, many fights that do not have a claim of this one that were a lot more exciting. I don't think in itself it was a terrible fight, but it didn't match up to what it was hyped to be. I mean, it went the distance, but I think people were expecting blood and real battle. Um, Mayweather fans will say, well, he was doing what he always does. So I guess Pacquiao fans should understand that aspect to it. Uh, what can be said? Certainly wasn't the fight of the century, but in terms of there is no way Mayweather is going to take a rematch. You just cannot see it happening in any circumstances because he has no incentive at all. Even if it was a case that the fans put so much pressure on him. I mean, the thing is, I think a lot of frustration also lies in the financial aspect. The pay-per-view exemplifies how boxing is becoming all about money, and I understand some of the pay-per-views were as much as $100. Now, I can understand people feeling very disappointed they did not get the money's worth for that. I'm pleased it didn't pay for anything with this one. Um, because really that's when you think about it, it is a lot of money. Also, when we think about what Mayweather earned for that, and this is another important aspect, he earned $118 million. Now, if you work that out, that's 1.8 million a minute. Per second, I don't even know. But the amount he got is more than the GDP of entire countries. So we're talking about a phenomenal amount of money for one sporting event. Pacquiao got a hell of a lot of money as well. But what these guys made, especially what Mayweather made, I think people sort of take the notion that if you're going to make that amount of money, you need to come out of the fight looking like you've been in a fight. Now, his supporters will say, well, that's the genius of Floyd Mayweather that he can do that. But detractors will say, well, he hasn't earned the money. I mean, if you're going to have a fight of the century, for goodness sake, make it look like a fight, make it look like a real brawl. And I'm with Oscar De La Hoya on this. I think it would have been. I mean, history might say otherwise. History might actually say that this actually was a great fight because it showed a master technician doing his craft in terms of Floyd Mayweather. But in terms of loads of us who were around in 2015 and saw the thing, it's very difficult to really say. So, what's the future for boxing? I know I'm repeating what I said in the last video, but I'm trying to be concise with this. Well, I think there's some things the boxing world can do to really make the sport survive. It's going to go through a rough patch because after this, a lot of people are going to be disappointed. And I know certainly non-boxing fans were interested in this. I don't know, as non-boxing fans, they might not be able to compare it to other fights, but certainly boxing fans, a lot of people will now be switched to the sport. I'm not. I'm going to continue watching fights and fighters. I tend to do it on YouTube anyway. I don't tend to go for pay-per-view because it does require a lot of money, and I don't have a stable job right now. But I tend to watch a lot of big fights on YouTube. Someone usually uploads them a month or two later, and sometimes they're high quality and they're worth watching. Um, Future for boxing, I think there's a lot of issues. I mean, all the big fights are in Vegas. I think promoters are going to need to start looking outside Las Vegas. And I accept the fact it's the fight capital of the world, but I'd like a situation like the 70s when Ali's fights were all over the world. Now, I know some of Pacquiao's fights have been in Macau and Hong Kong, Macau especially, and that's good. That's a good thing, I believe, for boxing. And I do give Bob Arum props for doing that. I mean, Brandon Rios, Chris Algieri, those big fights were in Macau. I would like to see genuinely more international fights. There's talk that the Khan fight with Mayweather could be in Abu Dhabi. That would be great. It would be great because it makes things a little bit more interesting. It's not usually Vegas. There is, I think, a perception that there is a bias from Las Vegas, from the judges or so on, towards Floyd Mayweather. I don't know if we can really prove that, but certainly the perception would be there. He's an American fighter. He lives in Las Vegas. Vegas is his hometown. So there might well be a perception that this is about business and there's a corrupt aspect to that. I don't think we can really prove that. You also have to remember the referee was American, the judges were American, so there's aspects of of the demographics of the fight that would definitely create controversy. Personally, I'd like to see a situation where a lot of big fights were held all over the world in places like, all over the world. I mean, if we think of some of Ali's fights, it was Manila, Kinshasa, Kuala Lumpur, Jakarta. He fought all over the world. London, you know. Um, in Britain, we've had some really big fights, but they've been domestic fights. It would be nice to see someone like Floyd Mayweather come over here, but I don't think he will do it. In fact, come to think about it, all of Mayweather's big fights are in Vegas. Um, in that sense, he plays it safe. It was still a very pro-Manny crowd. I never feel very comfortable when there is a crowd that is so biased one way, and although I understand why they were, it would have, I just don't feel comfortable with that. But anyway, that's it. Um, I don't think boxing is completely over, but I do think it's going to be very difficult for any promoter for a very long time to hype up a fight like this one. I mentioned in the previous video about, what fights are big, what fights aren't, in terms of what Ring perceives that to be. I guess I'd better leave it here. But history will tell how this really goes down. Certainly, contemporary opinion right now is negative, and it's that this was not the fight it was supposed to be. But do people really expect Mayweather to change his style for this fight? And I think if there was a rematch, there's no way that Mayweather would change his style. In terms of him being a card, I don't agree with that. I think his style is boring and definitely could be criticized for making that amount of money and not getting into a real battle. But I don't think that's the same as being a card. I mean, firstly, no prize fighter is really a card. That's something that I don't like the term. And I know the memes going around sort of showing Mayweather as a chicken and so on. It's a little bit tasteless, and I don't go along with that. But I do understand people's disappointment. There is. I'd like to hear from Mayweather fans how you perceive this, and Pacquiao fans, and any boxing fans. Let me know your thoughts. Cheers.